everybody. I'm super excited to have Fred Rosen here to talk with me this morning and all of you. Just wanted to have a note. We had a few technical issues on the last conversation with Bill Silva. We're learning the video production stuff as we go. Like a lot of people, we're trying new things. The next stuff should be fine. Thanks for your patience. We're live now, so if all goes well and you have a good internet connection, this should work out nicely. We're here to talk about our Fireside Chat. It's called Hindsight is 2020, Reflections on the Ticket Business 20 years later. For those of you who don't know, Fred Rosen was the CEO of Ticketmaster from 1982 to 1997. He's an architect of the ticketing business. Mainly, as we know it today, this man is responsible for how Ticketmaster was built and a lot of the business decisions that went around it and the growth of the company. Currently, he is also the CEO of Red Carpet Home Cinema. We'll get to that in a little bit. If you are just tuning in, I just want to remind you, we are producing this conference as a service to the music business. We made a decision when we started this that we also wanted to try to raise money for some good organizations. We decided not to charge for registration so that we could reach the widest audience possible. So if you are in a position to do so, we do ask if you look at the three organizations we've selected to support. One is the World Central Kitchen, which is a food distribution organization, and Fred was actually the impetus for looking at that corner. We're also supporting Film to Future and Music Cares, and you can go to our website and find links to donate directly to them. Whatever you could do would be great. Now, Fred, it's pretty funny. I just got off a conversation with Dana Frank, who is known as the queen of clubs and really a huge independent business owner, First Avenue in Minneapolis. So I feel like I'm jumping from the top of the indie spectrum to the top of the big business side of the corporate music events, live business, and wanted to really connect with you because unlike so many people who are in the business of ticketing and production right now, you're able to just speak freely. You can say whatever you want about how we're facing things. You don't have to worry about shareholders. You don't have to worry about public statements. And not that that was really a concern before. For as long as I've known you, you've spoken your mind pretty freely. And you and I actually first met when I was dealing with a crisis for a company, and you and I had some conversations about how to navigate it. So in some ways, it's pretty fitting that as we go through the pandemic and its effect on the music business, that here we are in conversation again. I think your advice and wisdom during those prior conversations was really part of what inspired me to reach out today, or a couple weeks ago, to set up this conversation. So I just really want to hand it to you and say, what's your take on where the music business is right now? Have you seen anything like this before, or is this a pretty unique crisis? You've got a few more years than me, so I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. I'm 76 now, which is pretty funny in and of itself. It's my way of negotiating now is you need to finish while I remember. So it's like, it's sort of like play those kinds of games, but I've never seen anything like this. And worse than that, I've never seen a central government handle anything so terribly. So you're in a place where, and I've said this for 40 years, human beings need to congregate. Human beings enjoy things in groups. So if you look at an arena, why do people buy the last 20 rows? Because it's the emotion of being in the box when the event is going on. Why do you sit and go to a sporting event and freeze when you can watch it on television? So there are connections to that. And unfortunately, because without getting into the politics of this, except to say that trying to solve medical issues through a political prism invariably leads to people dying. And before we're finished, I think the number is going to be closer to 150 to 200,000 people who will die. Music is about sharing everything. The growth of festivals is a function of a number of separate issues. One is clearly the value. So you have all these groups who appear, they're 2 or 3 days, they're spectacular, as opposed to an act that comes to an arena, which is also terrific. But what you have now is you can't have congregating because this virus is virulent. And in the end, part of it is, I remember, well, to a certain extent, you'd go to an event, between holding the light, swaying, clapping to the music, sharing a joint, whatever it was, all of that is tribal. All of that is dealing with you and your friends and going to an event. And live events are powerful. Music's very powerful. It's a serious connection for people. And when people hear songs, they relate to it not only to how good the music is, but they relate to it to where it impacted them in their lives, which is why oldie acts never go away and why new acts are always appearing, because there's always a new generation. And I always thought, and I meant this, I thought live events were great. For the most part, people went. You'd put 20,000 people in an arena, you'd put 50 or 75,000 people in a stadium. The number of incidents were generally fairly small, and people went and had a good time. And I think it's going to be, unless we get a vaccine and unless you get a cure, certainly not this year. It'll, they'll be limited in baby steps until we either create a herd mentality or a vaccine. So I think next year you might see the sun come out. I think we're going to live in partly cloudy weather for a while. And the reason that music doesn't translate on video, or you do live events and people try to do live events of music and they transmit it to the home, you can't charge a lot, because in the end, when you're watching it in your house, it's a video and you don't have the emotion, you don't have the crowd, you don't have the intensity. You can smoke a joint, but it's not the same thing as holding on to one of your friends and swaying with the music. It's different.
Yeah, I think it's gonna, there's so much with all of the people who have been furloughed or laid off, or people who were just sitting around and trying to figure out what to do next and have this unexpected time on their hands. I think so those precise issues are where we're going to see innovation and experiments and people really trying to come up with how to do it. I agree with you. It's not the same to watch something on a screen. We don't have that technology in our houses, and we just haven't gotten there yet. But the tribal nature of this, we are here trying to put together a conference and bring together community in the face of this, to bring the music community together, even though we can't join in person. So we're scratching that itch to the best we can right now.
I think it's going to have a bigger impact on how people work. I mean, everybody, I'm sitting here, doing 2, 3, 4 Zoom conferences a day. And it's not the same thing as sitting across the table and having lunch with someone. And clearly you miss that human contact. I mean, the reality is human beings were not meant to be hermits. Right. And I think I'm not looking to leave my house with a rifle and say, these are my constitutional rights. You have a right to do that, but you can't shoot the virus, in the end, until we get some kind of herd mentality or herd, I think it's immunization. You don't know if the person next to you has a fever. You can see how this virus spreads. It is virulent. And the dynamic is, I'd like us all to go back to normality. And what's interesting is, on a separate note, everybody talks about streaming and everybody talks about how this is going to impact movie theaters and so on. But streaming's television. At the end of the day, everybody's been home for 30 or 45 days and they've streamed to their heart's content. You can order in, you can stream everything. But at some point, streaming's TV. When you go to a concert, you're in that environment. When you go to a sporting event, you're in that environment. When you go to a movie theater, you're in that environment. The phone doesn't ring. Your spouse or significant other doesn't tell you to take out the garbage or pick up the phone or talk to the kid. You never watch a streaming movie uninterrupted. And so the dynamic, to me, is that part of human nature and human relationships is to share things with other people, and it will come back.
Focus, right? I mean, it's like, as you said, it's this freedom of distractions from outside that environment, largely, right?
Well, right. I mean, you think about when you're home, and look, we've all been lucky, and in terms of where we are, but the general population, the vast majority of people in America, there's only so many floor seats. There's only so many, 1/3 of what you sell. I mean, this is the joke about trying to make Ticketmaster user-friendly. That was always my joke after I left, that everybody was trying to make well, 1/3 of what you sell people hate, and they want to blame somebody, which is the back third of the house. Now, you need to be there for the emotion, and then you need to blame someone for doing that. You're not, if you sit in the back third of an airplane, no one cares. If you sit in the back third of the house, you go, oh, those service charges, this or that. There are all these complaints, but in the end, here's what's really interesting. You still go. Why do you go?
Yeah, I sat in the back row at a Metallica concert at in Washington, D.C. at the Capitals Arena, and I was in the very last row. I was still there. I still remember it. It was better than not going.
And the dynamic of that is it's a shared experience. And look, as technological as we become, where we're all tied to our phones and our laptops and computers, what's really important is, you can't live alone. You can't live in a vacuum. I mean, my joke is, after you've been quarantined, and if you can have food delivered, you can stream to your heart's content. But if you can't leave your house, the only thing that's going to go up are homicides. You're going to kill the people you're living with. You've got to get out of your house. Yeah. And the reality here is the sun will come out again. The music business will recover over a period of time. But, I've lived through various things dying. I lived through Broadway dying in the 80s, didn't die. I lived through concerts dying in the 90s. The concerts will be over. And, you think of the evolution of the business and ticketing. You went from where I had an antitrust investigation over $2 a ticket on a Pearl Jam.
Just one?
Yeah. I used to fill out credit card application, put occupation defendant. But you went from $2 a ticket that people blew a fit about to StubHub at the last Super Bowl going, we'll finance the tickets for you. And to me, if you can't afford the ticket, don't go.
Right.
And in the end, I think what ticketing has become, and I've seen this in the last 15 years, ticketing is like everything else. No one pays more for a ticket than they want. And, that principle started for me in the early 80s and goes to now. And you see the price of tickets, you see the price of Broadway before this pandemic. If people see the value, they pay for it. If people don't see you look at Bruce Springsteen, and I remember Bruce did 5 shows at the Sports Arena, and they were $18, the front row and the last row. 5 shows, he sold out. And then fast forward to 2 years ago, he's on Broadway at $750 a ticket.
Right.
Look, it's evolution. And in the end,
you had access to those tickets and new people, they weren't necessarily available at that price.
And go back to the following. Nobody pays more for a ticket than they want. And some tickets don't even get to face value. I mean, in the end. So when you analyze the business, and then you've got the politicians, and then you've got the lawsuit. I mean, we can get into everything comes in a circle. People are still arguing about exclusive contracts. And I saw that in the latest litigation against Ticketmaster. They'll lose that because, you ask people.
The plaintiffs
will lose that part of the complaint. I don't know about the rest, because how many, a ticketing system is fundamentally an inventory control system. How many operating systems do you have in your computer? One.
Yep.
How many inventory control systems does a supermarket have or anybody have? One. So it always looks terrible that you have an exclusive contract, but everything in an arena or a stadium is exclusive, from food service to parking to all the different, to security. All of those things are generally exclusive. But in ticketing, it seems to be to the rafters. And, it's like, let's rush the barricades.
So I want to jump to, I think, the biggest live issue in the business right now, which is refunds. So we're in this position now where all of these festivals have canceled, concerts, clubs, everything across the board, right? We all know it. The terms and conditions that people are required to agree to in the course of the transaction, some of those terms and conditions will explicitly say that refunds are not a possibility. And we've seen different promoters handling this question in different ways, and different ticketing companies handling it in different ways. The question I have is really, what do you think? I mean, I've seen promoters say that they can't give a refund, and the honest answer why is because they already spent the money, because the ticketing company advanced them the money. They used the money to operate their festival and their company, and they canceled the event literally a week before, 2 weeks before. So they're a small company and they can't give refunds. There's that category. And we're gonna have a panel on that later today. But from your perspective, if you were in a chair of any ticketing company, let's keep it out of the Ticketmaster business. How would you go about making the decision of issuing refunds or not under these circumstances, regardless of what the terms and conditions say?
Let me give you a top line view of that. And I'll do it anecdotally in where we are. And I'm not doing this to be critical of anybody, because that's not my role. And, I think, my time has passed. But from a perspective of what I would do, okay, there was in the 90s, until about the mid 90s, I think it was, we never refunded service charges. And there was a reason for that. We did the service and I didn't want to do that. And I think it was 93 or 94 when the industry was going through a difficult time. And I named Guns N' Roses Guns N' Refunds, because you didn't know if they would show up or not show up, or Axl would show up at doing them. I mean, it was complicated. So I made a decision at the time that we would change our policy and call it and start refunding service charges, which we did. We were also extremely careful about advancing money to promoters. We did that to arenas, and in most cases, we did not do that to promoters, and we held the money till the shows happened. What's happened, and in those days, distribution was driven by outlets and phones. The internet didn't exist. So let's start with that. So that was sort of an easier level to control. Now, everything's driven by the internet, and the internet is, has changed. Do you need outlets anymore? A lot of the phones is mostly customer service. And because the internet basically demolished all the scalping laws, you have all these companies in the secondary market. My joke is the only people who aren't in ticketing now are 3 people who just got off the plane from Nepal. So, everybody's in the business, but everybody's gotten and forgotten that you can't live on clients' money. The industry has done very well. The business grew every year, and people forgot about that. And, when I think about when I built Ticketmaster, I bought 30 companies, and that's what the government allowed me to buy Ticketron, because ultimately they were in the client accounts too.
Right.
And so every company I bought was in the client accounts and using future shows to run their business.
Right.
We didn't do that. We separated our money day one. In other words, you'd put the money for the tickets and the shows in one account. You take out your service charges that belong to you in your operating account. And banks did not have, when we became borrowing account, the banks didn't have a right of offset against our client accounts. It was like a lawyer's escrow account, fundamentally. Yeah. Okay. What's happened with all these companies is they've used the money. Now, here's the problem. You have this pandemic. They don't have the money, right? Yeah. Now, what do you think is going to happen when you tell somebody they're not going to get their money back? They're going to be angry, okay? And you've got all these different sellers who are out doing this stuff. And here's my view of it. You know what's going to happen. You know there's going to be class action lawsuits. You know the attorney generals are going to get involved because this is a really simple consumer issue they can solve.
Right.
And underneath it, the third thing is go back to your credit card company and charge it back. You didn't get the service. They can't change the rules. The credit card company will give it back to you. I remember, for example, I bought some wine futures. This happened 20 years ago. And wine futures are you pay for Bordeaux, it could be a Bordeaux or a Burgundy, and then it's delivered to you a year and a half later or a year later, but you're paying for it before it's shipped to the United States. Turns out the guy who sold it to a group of us was a fraud. So we didn't get our wine. And it took a while, but I explained it to the credit card company, and I was able to charge back my whole purchase, which was significant. Now, if people would just, instead of arguing about it, just charge it back.
Right.
And the reality will be they have to give it back to you. My wife, with Airbnb, she was going to go to a festival, but obviously it's not happening. And Airbnb wanted a doctor's note. Okay, anybody can get a doctor's note. And they wound up refunding the money. I think they all have to make their own choice. But if it was my issue,
yes,
I would have given it back. It would never have been an issue.
Right.
In other words, we wouldn't have been in that money. And which I think Live Nation just did. They went and got themselves a line to fundamentally deal with this. Why make it more difficult for people when you can say, look, I'm not giving you back your money, but I don't know when the festival is going to happen. And if you go, maybe you get the virus. Who could ask for more?
Right. Yeah, I think, one of the, you mentioned the change, the sort of the impact of the internet. I mean, one of the other serious changes between Ticketmaster under your era and now is the ability of the consumers and purchasers to be heard so loudly, so quickly when a company issues a decision with which they are not happy, right? And all of a sudden you can go from the class action lawsuits were there before, but now your public reputation can be assailed very quickly, long before the class action lawsuits filed, right? And so from your perspective, you would just say, you think if you had the keys now, you'd basically say, gotta do the refunds, we'll figure out the rest later.
Yeah, and the other side is this, you've got so many people in the secondary market, and I guarantee you, they're not running them. I mean, I watched some of the decisions StubHub made. I can't talk about, I won't talk per se about Ticketmaster or AG because they're primary sellers and they're both real companies. And I think each have done a pretty good job, and they'll get to the right place. But the secondary guys don't quite get what's going on. And they're always living in the moment. And, StubHub just got allegedly bought for $4.5 billion. I don't know if that deal closed. I think in the end, this is such a dramatic consumer issue that you wouldn't want to face it. But I also think because the industry has had if you look from the outside, it's had this, the amount of festivals, the amount of shows, and the amount of, and at all prices, you have the club shows, you have the, medium market shows, you have the 5 to 10,000 seat shows, or the 5,000 seat shows, stadium shows, arena shows, and festivals. I think people were blindsided. And I think in a certain way, everybody assumed everything would be okay and not understand the ramifications of what this would be. I mean, I ran Comdex in, which was a big trade show in 2000, 2002. And after 9/11, you know, I described my life as selling UJA bonds at a PLO rally. I mean, it was like nobody wanted to go, nobody wanted to get on a plane. People said, we'll work from the house. And that was just for trade shows. And people started doing these video conferences and so on in terms of, you know, how to do virtual conferences. And it took a while for that to recuperate or to come back. I think the reality is going to be that this could take 2020. I don't think there's going to be anybody in live sporting events this year. I'll be shocked. I mean, and if they are, the movie theaters are going to open at 20 or 25% capacity. You know, you'll need a body condom when you go, and a helmet, and, you know, and a mask, and you know, part of the enjoyment is freedom. And I think you've got to think about safety, not only for yourself, but for the person next to you. And so it will come back because we'll figure out a vaccination or you know, or a cure. But it's not coming back this year. And my bet would be, if I was looking at it, I would plan for middle of next year to the end of next year.
And what do you think the impact is going to be on the smaller and mid-level, both ticketing companies and the independent promoters and independent venues? They don't have quite the access to capital that Live Nation and AEG do. You know, do you have a thought about how the playing field looks, you know, a year from now?
I think a lot of people got in this because they thought it was easy. Because part of what the big companies do is make it look easy. They go, what's the big deal? I spit out a ticket. Or they make a big deal and, you know, they have access to a ticket. But nobody's experienced the downside. And you're dealing with a lot of young people who, you know, in the sense of not asking the right question, don't have the right experience. So when I think of what's going to happen to a lot of these companies, when Mel Allen was an announcer for the Yankees in the 50s, and someone hit a home run, he would say, going, going, gone. And I think that's what you're going to see with this. And, you know, some of it's evolution. And I saw, I think it was Eventbrite said they're not going to do music anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot, you know, when I describe the analogy this way. Anybody can you know, make a sailboat work when the sun is out, it's 80 degrees, and the water's calm. But when the storms come, right, you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I would tell you the following. Most of people have never been prepared for this. You know, you might be prepared for a show canceling or 2 shows canceling, but not the, let's just say, not the entirety of what this pandemic has meant for the live industry. And look, to be fair, the live industry gave me a lot of benefits. It was the most fun I think I've ever had in my life, the 16 years I built Ticketmaster. I get a lot of credit, but you should also know that there were a lot of people around me who were with me for 10 and 15 years who worked with me and trusted me and who enabled me to build that business. And they were loyal. And, you know, I hate to use the word loyal because taking on a different meaning, but they cared about what we did. They were good at what they did. And I think the rules that we put in, it's the same business model, you know, in the sense of, you know, everybody blames Ticketmaster or AEG for the service charges. But in the end, the vast majority of those service charges are not being kept by the ticket companies. They're going to the buildings, the promoters, the acts, because now everybody's in one pot. But the majority of that, and when you read the lawsuits, they think Ticketmaster has, or AEG has, this unbelievable amount of power. Well, you don't, because it's a solar system. And what I did when it got built was I took the heat on me and recognized that, look, if they focused on me, they weren't going to focus on what was going on. And my whole belief was the public will pay for the ticket and the convenience. And in the end, while the internet made it even easier, when you're done with the pre-sales, the semi-sales, the other sales, no scalping and where all this stuff goes, you're now back into what do people pay for a ticket, and the ticket companies become an easy target for everybody to blame. But here's the benefit of what the ticket companies do provide. And this doesn't get written about because, you know, anything with the service charge is not consumer friendly. You have to deal with that to start with why people in the airlines charge for baggage, or, you know, you go to a hotel and they charge you a facility fee, or using the gym, or using, you know, there are extra fees that are charged. But here's what Ticketmaster did. And this is what I take a lot of pride in for everybody. We legitimized the business. No one worried about audits. No one worried about rows that didn't exist. We made selling simple and gave people an opportunity to do and access tickets. And part of the reason the business grew is because you had the ability to roll into multiple shows. We won't get credit for that, because in the end you charge the service charge, or people thought I was too tough, or whatever it was. But the reality is we made this a business. And artists after I left, and they started doing, and we created golden circles. I pushed for that, and not one price fits all. Going to watch a concert and scaling a house is just as important as going to watch a basketball game and scaling a house. And every artist is a brand. And by giving people all of those benefits and the structure of knowing that if they bought a ticket from us, they would go to the event, and if the event got canceled, they'd get their money back, we had an impact on the industry. It's not, you know, whether you liked me or didn't like me. It's not whether you thought that Ticketmaster was a son of a bitch for doing what they did and charging a service charge. The answer is you didn't camp out. You showed up. And then the internet made everything even easier, because ultimately, you know, you didn't even have to go to an outlet. You know, when one of my favorite stories is we put the first Chicago White Sox Chicago Cubs night game on sale. First game, I forget the year. And we had like 28 million attempts on the phone in the first 10 minutes, and took down the 911 system. I mean, you know, they're anecdotal, but ultimately what you did was it worked. And it gave people an opportunity to access, know they were going to go, know they were going to pay. And then the reality was they would get value for what they paid for.
And let me cut you off for a second. I have a question. You know, you've mentioned it before in our conversations that in some ways you were sort of looked at as the Darth Vader of this business.
Right.
And, you know, and you willingly sort of took on that persona to the benefit of artists, venues, and everybody else that was taking money out of the service fees. You know, how was that for you to be that, you know, in the Ticketmaster's book, you know, you are the Darth Vader, and I'm just wondering for you personally, how was that?
Well, until the Pearl Jam stuff, I didn't take any of it too seriously, because you'd sit in a room, and a lot of this started with, I was talking to some building manager, and I said, you know, because I would talk to my clients, my top 25 or 30 clients every couple of weeks, if they didn't call me, because I thought it was important to stay in touch. And I've always believed in relationships. And I knew what I was creating. I knew that by putting myself in front, fundamentally, you're the phone company. Why does anybody care about a ticket company? And what you did was, by putting myself out front, it gave me the ability to pick up the phone and call buildings all over America who would not have known me, because our marketing budget was zero. We didn't pay to market. And I figured I would make myself the focal point. So I knew I would have some broad shoulders for that. And so I called this, and I said, you sound terrible, what's the matter? And he said, oh, I gotta go see, in those days it was more municipal buildings than private buildings. And he said, I gotta go see the mayor and tell him I gave up the rent to get the act, and it's 20 grand, 15 or 20 grand, I don't remember. And I said, I'll give it to you. And he said, how are you going to give it to me? I said, well, I'll raise the service charge $3. The act's doing really well. The tickets are expensive. No one will care. And he goes, can you really do that? And I go, yeah, I can really do that. And he says, that'd be great. And then about a week later, after the show sells out and I give him his money and I make the same amount of money, you know, some reporter says, how come the service charges went up by $3? And the building manager goes, I don't know. You got to keep an eye on those guys in California. And with all the noise that went on, no, we never lost a client. So what you did is you filtered it. And I was never one to hang out. You rarely saw me backstage. I never liked to go to the events, interestingly enough. I never liked the crowds. So to me, I think when the Pearl Jam thing came and my daughter was in school and she got a lot of grief about your father kept Pearl Jam from touring, which was nonsense, that kind of impacted me somewhat. But in general, that went with the job. And I think what Ticketmaster has become over the last 20 years is the phone company. It's faceless. There's no one you can blame. And I realized in the Pearl Jam controversy in the first 6 months, when all that stuff was focused on me, and you'd read in the morning when you'd go to your office, you'd read the stuff that was written. And sometimes, as tough as you are, your hands would shake because some of that stuff was crazy what they wrote. You know, you controlled the price of every ticket in America. You told people what, I mean, it was insane. But then I got this epiphany, which basically said the way to make this controversy go away is not to talk anymore. And so starting in January, I had different people be spokesmen for the company. And here's what I learned. If they couldn't focus on anybody, it kind of diffuses itself. So you had a woman, you had a guy, you had different faces, different shapes. And once they can't focus on that in a company, you get lost if they can't make a target out of you. So I consciously understood at the beginning that there was going to be a focal point and that the public would look at me one way. But every guy who ran an arena, every woman who ran an arena, everybody who was in the ticketing business knows it was thankless. Right. And when I got in the business, nobody made money. And I taught people how to make money. And in the beginning, the acts didn't share in that money, and that was the controversy. So, you know, the managers or agents would call me up and say, you know, you're not going to raise the service charges on this show, are you? And the building managers would get beaten up by the acts or the promoters or whoever it was. And then the building would call me up and go, listen, add $2 or $3 and, you know, and make sure I can get some extra money. And I would do that. And then they'd call the building up, or they'd call the manager up or the agent and say, I would do it, but Fred won't. So, you know, that was the rules. And, you know, the guys at Ticketmasters who wrote that book got about a third of the story right. And, you know, in the end, it is what it is. You know, what you did was this. There were places like the Westchester Premier Theater where guys went to jail, where rows didn't exist. You couldn't do rolling into shows. When we could sell a show out in an hour, people thought that was amazing. By the mid 80s, you had technology where you could sell 2,000 tickets a minute, which no one ever heard of in those days. And now it's totally different because of the internet. But to be fair, you know, I had a fairly good sense of what I was doing and a fairly good sense of going home and leaving it there and try to find humor to, you know, to deal with it. I remember once I was at a cocktail party and an agent came over to me, or a manager, I can't remember, and it was a Friday night and it had been a particularly bad week. And he said to me, you got a lot of nerve charging $8 on a $50 ticket on the phones. And I said, this isn't the place. Come to my office. We'll discuss it. You know, and of course, what happens is that person drank too much, got louder. And of course, there's a crowd around you. And he finally goes, I demand to know why you charged $8. And I looked at him and I said, I'll tell you why I charged $8. I didn't think I could get 12. And everybody laughed and thought it was pretty funny. And someone said, you really shouldn't screw around with him. And in the end, it's not trying to embarrass him. It was understanding the marketplace and understanding what people will do. And we had a pretty good sense of that. And after I left, it's gone exponentially. Meet and greets for $4,000. I mean, crazy. But go back to, nobody pays more for a ticket than they want.
one of the things that there's at least one, if not more, ticketing companies doing now is they just, to follow that principle, nobody pays more than they want for a ticket. They're just having one price, and it doesn't break it down into service fees and facility fees. And instead of sort of creating this illusion of separate responsibility buckets for where the money is going, they just are offering it as, here's the price you're paying, and we know you don't care where that money's going, so we're not going to waste your time and tell you a story. Do you think that's an approach? Did you ever think about that approach?
We did it. We did it in 1994. I did it with Irving for the Eagles. We did one price all in. And then everybody said, well, you included the service charges, but nobody knew what they were. And look, I personally think you should do an all-in ticket. And that's what the ticket costs. Whether, and I have no skin in the game, and my opinion is worth nothing. So, my view is you can do that, and that's fine. There's nothing that anybody's done that hasn't been tried. Sometimes things are more receptive as time evolves. I mean, when I got in the business, everything was $1 a ticket. And I remember I was in a meeting in Houston, and I said, why is there on a $40 Houston Rockets ticket, $1 service charge? And they said, because there are $5 tickets. And I said, well, why can't you have $1 service charge on a $5 ticket and $2 on a $40 ticket? And the answer was, well, you can't. And I go, why? Was that like one of the tablets Moses dropped? I mean, we did multiple service charges on the same event. We did push for scaling of the house. The goal was as follows. As you saw the secondary market evolve in the 80s and 90s, and we were not part of that. The world has changed now where the ticket companies get money from all buckets. We were sort of the barrier to protect people, and we would cancel multiple credit cards and so on. But the answer was this: look, guys, if you don't take the money, the secondary market's going to take the money. So these people don't have a stake in the game. They don't have the risk the promoters have. They don't have the risk the buildings have. And part of scaling the house was not to be greedy. It was to bring to music what existed in theater, what existed in sports, and to make, and as every artist becomes a brand, it became, say, the stakeholders should be the beneficiary of the money. And that's what we accomplished. Now, you won't get any credit for that because they walk around calling you a ticket bastard or whatever they want to call you. But underneath it, that's what it was. It was business. And people didn't understand that. And, in the end, when the sun comes out again, all the marginal guys will be gone. And then a new group of marginal guys will show up. And then, Ticketmaster will be there, AEG will be there, and people will still bitch about what they pay, and life will go on.
What, I was thinking about kind of looking back to the title of our conversation, Hindsight's 2020. If you think for a minute about your career at Ticketmaster, are there any decisions that you made that you think about, and you've had time to reflect and you go, oh, I could have done that one differently? And, what maybe you're being able to look back down the road you've walked, and is there anything that you see that, oh, I could have done that and that maybe went this direction?
I think in terms of being reflective, I didn't know what I started when I started it. I mean, a lot of the assumptions I made when I went there were wrong. And then every year I would analyze what I accomplished and what the company accomplished. And you try to learn. And I've never been a person who second guesses decisions. You made the decision, move on, right? Nothing, even in some of the controversies. I think if anything, I would have been better, not being so visible. maybe. But the other side is, look at the success you had. People thought you created this monolith, which was pretty funny. And, you know, I'm proud of what I did. It's yesterday's news. I'm shocked that people still remember. I mean, I'm gone 23 years. I don't generally talk to the industry. Nobody's interested in my opinion. And I think after you leave, you really have to recognize that you got to move on. That, you know, what was yours isn't yours. And people are going to do things differently. But I think what we did in legitimizing the business, making it a business, understanding that that you could give people real accounting, that you could have the acts maximize their money and not worried about being, you know, ripped off in terms of tickets that didn't show up anywhere. Organizing multiple dates. What you did is you made it a business. Now, somewhere, even today, and I look at the investigations and I look at it with sort of a jaundiced eye. And look, the government has a lot of power and you have to be respectful. But they all know tickets get you to page 3. So nobody seems to care that you can buy a bottle of wine for $2 and you can buy a bottle of wine for $2,500. But somehow in ticketing, there's this theory that everyone has to have equal access to tickets. And the business doesn't work like that. The business is a function like anything else, where you can have people go to the Four Seasons and you can have people go to Motel 8 and, you know, in a hotel. And all that I did was make people see ticketing in that light. And then, you know, look at exponentially how that's involved, how that's evolved. And now, do I think there'll be a reset for a while? Yeah, I do. I think prices will come down because I think people are going to have to be sensitive to the fact that as people start coming together again, you can't maximize what you have. And I think people are going to be careful about how this door gets reopened. But having said that, it's a great business. It has lots of interesting characters and amazingly talented people. And I think when you go to a show, think of this when you go to a show or a ball game. First, you got to get the ticket. That may not be so easy. Then you got to deal with the traffic to get there. And then you got to go through metal detectors to get in, right? And now you'll probably have to have a thermometer. Fortunately, you know, or you'll have the Board of Health. And then when you leave, you got to go through traffic to get home. So there's 2.5 hours of a 2-hour show that you try not to remember. And yet when you go to the show, you can't wait to go to the show. And all that noise around it gets dissipated because the show and the artist is more important than the noise around it. That's the power of live.
Ultimately, that's part of the story and the journey, right? I mean, it with the group of people who you go to the show, it's the journey there, you know, what you go through and whether you get merch or not, or whether you get a beer and then you go in and you have the moment and then you sort of have the decompression from that. I have a couple of questions that have popped up and what we're going to try to do, this will be the first one, we're going to try to keep the chat room open after the end of the talk and allow for some interaction. We'll see how that goes. Our producer, James, is going to help with that. And I also want to remind people, if you're joined us a little bit later, registration was free. We are supporting some good organizations and asking you to do the same. If you go to our website, we've selected 3 nonprofits. And if you're in a position to give, we ask that you pick one of them and support. So thank you all. And Fred, I want to, one of the questions that came in, you know, the first one, I'm going to give it to him, was, do you think that after this, we're finally going to get to the end of paperless ticketing, or do you think there's some reason to keep it?
I have no idea. I think in the end, when I read, I mean, look, I'm not here to cause a controversy. That's not what this is about. But when I read how hard they make it, and you got to have your fingerprint, your toe print, you know, you got to have your, you know, your retina scan to get in with the ticket, and it can't be transferred. What are we doing? You know, when Monet sold his art, he was broke, right? I mean, in the end, it's a ticket. You bought it. It's like a bird. The babies leave the nest, it's gone. Figure out what the price is worth and move on. I think anything that restricts free commerce is awful. Honest to God. That's from a generic point of view. And, you know, I think of this, and here's the answer. So I don't know if paper tickets will go away. Some people want them. Some people don't. You know, do I think, will you get a season ticket that'll show up on your phone? Probably. And then you'll have to find a way to transfer it so you can give it to your friend. I just don't know what we're doing with some of this. I read this stuff. I don't talk to anybody, and I laugh. In the end, here's how the scalping laws got destroyed. When I left Ticketmaster, they made a decision because they were afraid of the antitrust laws to let the groups get 10% of the tickets, because the Grateful Dead and Fish always got tickets for their fan club. So they let every group get tickets for their fan club. 10%, I think. So now Mary Jones or Peter Jones in Iowa gets 4 tickets, and they're in the 2nd row or the 8th row or the 10th row. And StubHub happened. The internet has now opened up. So they go, wow, I can take 2 of those tickets, put them on StubHub, and pay for 4. Okay?
Yeah.
Then they think, wait, I can put 4 tickets and pay my rent and sit where I always sit with Ticketmaster and complain about the service charges. I mean, that's the kind of dynamic. And so they eviscerated the scalping law, because who are the AGs going to go after? They're not going to go after Mary Jones. They're not going to go after Peter Jones. So in the end, tickets should be free commerce. That is my opinion. Once they're sold, look, if you want to put them in the secondary market and the groups say, I'm going to take X% and I'm going to put that in the secondary market and see what the market will bear, that's their right. They're the brand. They own it the same way that a team can say it's $2,500 for a floor seat. I mean, Jerry Buss taught me that. The floor seats were very expensive, but he always left 10 rows in the older forum for $7 to $9 tickets. And you consume content the way you can afford it. Now, that works for everything else, except tickets have a different cachet. It works for clothes. It works for hotels. It works for restaurants. It works for everything. But somehow, ticketing can't do it. I don't get it. And by the way, it's the same arguments. And
well, and ultimately, one of the things about ticketing, right? I mean, part of a huge part of the price of tickets is what the artist team wants the ticket price to be, right? I mean, that's coming from them.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're sitting with managers and agents who are smart. Fred Rosen never set the price of one ticket in America. That's the truth. Never did. Did I sit in rooms where we discussed it? Yes. But I never had the final decision. Never.
And what did those discussions look like? How do you assess that?
Well, in the 80s, it was about, in late 80s, as we got big, you had access to information that no one else had access to because of the content and because of the numbers. And so you'd sit in a room and I always had people who I could talk to who could tell me what the secondary market was. So I had some sense of where those tickets were also. And I would say, look, you're leaving money on the table. So I'm going to sell a ticket for $20 and I'm going to add a $3 service charge. It's $23 and maybe it's $24 on the phones. And the minute those tickets show up in the first third of the house, they're going to be on the secondary market for $200. So why don't we scale the house and say the front of the house is worth $75 and then you have 3 different sections. And I remember sitting with somebody and you have to do this with a straight face. You can't, you remember, you're the service company. You're not bigger than your clients. Your clients are bigger than you are. And you always have to remember that. And one of the rules that I had from a business point of view is never embarrass any of the people who are your clients. You can embarrass yourself, but you can't embarrass them. And so we're sitting there and we're looking at a grid, and I'll make it really easy. And let's take the orchestra was row A to row Z. And somebody said to me with a straight face, how do you know where the golden circle ends? And I said, it's really simple. It's a computer. So if the row A is 100 and row Z is 50, you keep selling the hundreds when the show goes on sale till you run out. If it gets to row Z, that's the golden circle. If it gets to row M, then you know you've gone a little bit too far, and you start moving row Z up and row M back until they meet in the middle. And then you sell all your tickets, and you let the market determine what you have. And so that dynamic had a big impact on people saying, wow, I could get more money for my show. I said, why are you sitting here beating me up? And of course, the beginning of the business was everybody counted what you were making. Well, if and people would call me and go, well, you made money on the show and I lost money on the show, the promoters. I go, well, why'd you bid that much? And they go, if I didn't do it, someone else would do it. And I go, why is that my problem? Right. And it was confrontational. And I think people did not understand how confrontational the business was, because what you were doing was carving a new profit center. You were carving a whole new revenue stream that didn't exist. And there were people like, and I'll say, because I don't know if they're listening, Bob Leonard, Jerry Seltzer, Ann Mooney, John Bushhorn, Kabuzzi, a host of people, Marla Hoykowitz, who's still around and working for Ticketmaster, who worked really hard and put in huge amount of hours and dealt with clients. And, we built relationships. And, everybody said, well, you have exclusives. And this I want to talk about. Exclusives weren't done because you wanted to keep competition out. You could look back and say that's why they were done, but they weren't. The reason I wanted exclusives when I started in 83 when I had nothing, and 82 when I had nothing, was if somebody's been in business for 30 years and you've been in business 30 minutes, where are people going to go? What they know. When your marketing budget is zero, did Ticketmaster ever sell a ticket? No, but Elton John did, Bruce Springsteen did, Pick the Act, Journey did. And so if you had an exclusive at the beginning, right, which I insisted on because I wouldn't take, people would offer me half the building, I wouldn't take it. And the reason I did it was, look, they will go to Ticketron, and if Ticketron doesn't have the tickets for the forum, let's say as an example, they will come to Ticketmaster and find out where those tickets are, and they'll never go back. So exclusives were not driven to be anti-competitive. They were driven to be how you can compete in a world when you didn't exist. And so exclusives are the very essence of the ticket business, because you can't do best available seat without an exclusive. Now, the secondary market's the Wild West. Everybody's got some access to something else. And that came after I left. But that's the reality of the business. And underneath it was, it was fun. We had fun. Even with all the nonsense, we had fun. And you were crafting something that didn't exist. And today, when I look at the prices and I think of some of the fights I used to have with people, it's hysterical. But that's evolution. And in the end, what you don't have people saying is the acts got screwed. And then too many people got in the business, and I don't think the public should be screwed. And the big guys will survive, and the little guys who never understood their responsibility will disappear.
So we've just got a couple minutes. I'm gonna ask one more question, but you're gonna have to answer it in brief. I think what's happening is we're going into the chat at noon. And so do you think that COVID's gonna have any impact on the secondary ticketing business? Do you think what we're going through now will make any changes?
Short term. But when the sun comes out again, people will forget. Look, part of everything is, if you wanted to make the secondary market go away, instead of playing 2 dates, play 20. In the end, it's a supply and demand curve. And there's always people with money, and there's always people who want to get it. Here's how to look at the secondary market. 5-year-old in a toy store. I want what I want when I want it. What does it cost? Next.
Right. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We are going to open the chat component of this, if all goes well, now. And if there's, if we're seeing questions and stuff like that, we can address them. I'm just gonna kind of continue, Fred, and James, our producer, will tell us if we're doing it right. one of the things, just to look backwards a little bit, when I started buying tickets, I can distinctly remember camping out for Who tickets, to be there the night before and waiting for the tickets to go on sale the next morning. Is there anything that you think we've lost in the ticketing process as things have evolved and it's easier and you don't have to do any of those things? Are there any things you look back and go, we lost something?
No, the event is the show, not buying the ticket. I mean, you're not supposed to camp out. I mean, first of all, the only people who camped out were the scalpers by the end. And, you're supposed to want to go to the event. The reality is, I would always say the following: the ticket sale is irrelevant. It's the event that counts. So why we focus on the ticket sale?
Yeah, but I disagree. I think certainly when I was 14, 46 now, right? There's a part of me that there was kind of like the journey to the show. There was a moment in time, and I think it's fine that it's gone, but I would say that moment of camping out, while certainly there were scalpers there, it also was sort of an initial meeting of this music fan community of drinking beers in line, and somebody would have a little boombox and they'd be playing Who songs, and you had sort of this community moment that took the pain out of the fact that you were waiting in line and turned it more into a celebration of the artist that you were going to go see. So I think there was actually more to it than just the transaction.
But let me do two things that, okay, for the Kumbaya, I missed that part because standing on a line never inspired me. But two things happened that really changed it. There was a kid who was sitting outside of Tower Records for a Prince show in Boston. And he was sitting in one of those chairs you see at the beach.
Yeah. And
a car went over the median and killed him. You don't want that on your head. Second thing is, and it happened at a Music Plus. For those of you who don't remember, there actually were music stores before the internet. And we used to have a policy of cash only because the artists wouldn't pay for the credit card. So it was cash. It wasn't technologies. Nobody would pay for the credit card. So in those days, the limits was 6 or 8 tickets per person. So generally, the first 20 people in an outlet had enough money for 6 or 8 tickets. And if you were talking about $30, $40, or $50 a ticket, you're talking about carrying $200, $300, $400. That's a living ATM. Right. So at one outlet, 2 guys show up with shotguns and robbed everybody. Who wants that on their head? In the end, there's always some moron who ruins it for everybody else. And, and so I would tell you that I think one of the benefits we did is getting rid of those lines and not putting people in harm's way. And, if you feel like standing online, I'm sure there's other places you can do that.
Grocery store right now, right?
Yeah,
well,
right.
I think that's all the time we've got. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, you're watching, there's a Facebook event page and there's chat happening there. Fred, I just want to say thank you so much for taking some time with me this morning to have this conversation, and look forward to the sun coming out, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do this. Thank you for the time. Thank you for, remembering, and calling me. It was nice.
All right.